Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at creating a really cool stylized polygon animation inside of After Effects. So let's go and take a look at what we're going to be creating. All right, so you can see there's some really nice details here in the animation and the way that it comes in and it goes out. And the cool thing about this is that it's actually really easy to do. So recently, I've seen a lot of animation styles like this, and I thought it might be a fun thing to tackle for a tutorial. And there's a really cool technique I want to show you that makes this really customizable. Now, if you're watching this tutorial in the future, like in 3 years from now, and this style isn't really popular, well, in that case, today, we're going to be taking a look at creating a retro vintage polygon animation. Let's go ahead and get started. That way I have an alternate version. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's create a new composition, and I want to make it a square. So I'm going to do 1024 by 1024. We'll call this Polygon, and we'll hit OK. So we can see a square comp here. Let's create a new solid. And we'll call this rings. And let's just change the color so we can see it a little better. Blue. Hit OK. Then we'll come over here to the effects and presets. We're going to type in radio waves. And we'll drop that onto our solid. And if we scrub the timeline, we can see that it just kind of creates these rings, almost like a particle system. Now, I want to create some polygons. We could come over here to the polygon editor and just type in 6 sides, and there we go. But instead, I want to create a mask, and that way we can customize it a little bit later. So let's go and take the polygon tool, and we'll zoom in here, and I'll pull up the title action safe, and we're going to create a polygon from the center here. So we'll click in here, and we'll drag. Now, if you use the up and down arrow keys, you can change the sides. And so we'll just go and make it 6 sides, and that is the most amount of math we're going to be doing. So hold down Alt and Shift, and that will align it like that. Then we'll come over here to the radio waves effect, and let's change it from polygon to the mask, and then we'll select the mask number 1. So there we go. So what's nice about this is I can edit the mask, and it'll change my animation, so that way we can customize it a little bit more. All right, let's go and take a look at the animation settings. We have the frequency, so we can turn that up, and you can see that it increases the amount of radio waves. We can also turn up the expansion. So let's go and start customizing this. So first, let's set the expansion to 10. Then let's lower the lifespan. So let's lower this down. And you can see that it kind of lowers the size of the rings. Now, I don't want them to fade out. So if we scroll down to the stroke, we set the fade out to 0. And I'll go ahead and set my lifespan down to 1. And then for my frequency, let's go up to about 6. Now, we do want the animation to stop. So let's go to frame 10 and set a keyframe on the frequency, and then move forward a few frames and turn the frequency down to 0. And that way our animation turns on and then it stops. Now, let's go and play with the color. So this blue is looking pretty good, but let's try something a little bit more muted. And because it's a particle system, I'm actually going to keyframe the color over the life. So let's go to about frame 6, set a keyframe for the color, move forward a few, and let's change this to sort of a more of a greenish color. And you can actually see that the color changes. Now let's turn up the width to about 50, and that way we can see it a little bit better. Hit U, and then I'll show you the keyframes. Now I'm going to make one more keyframe for the color, and let's just make this a bit brighter. Now I'm going to go ahead, take my color keyframes, and move them over a little bit. And you can see how it affects the animation over time. All right, let's go and customize the colors. You can see the color graph here. We could double click on a keyframe, and that'll let us edit it. So maybe add a little bit more green into this. Let's see, something like that. Maybe take a little bit of the blue out of this. And I think that looks pretty good. The other thing that we can do is keyframe the end width. So you can see it gets larger, gets smaller. Well, what we'll do is we'll go to about frame 10, set a keyframe for the end width, move forward, and then set it up to about 100. And that way the end of the rings get larger. Now, I probably need to move these keyframes over. And as I do that, we'll see that more of the rings are going to be larger at the end. But because I want the animation to fade out, let's go ahead and turn this back down to maybe 10 so that some of them get larger and then the very last one gets smaller. So let's just move this over until it gets smaller. So there we go. Okay, so the way to think about it is that whatever the settings are when that ring is created, those are the settings it will use. So it's similar to a particle system. All right, so this looks pretty good, but how do we create the effect where it animates on over time like this? Well, let's go and take a look at how to do that. First, I want to create a new solid, and we'll go ahead and name this gradient and hit OK. Then I'll right click and choose layer style, and we're going to choose gradient overlay. Now, this creates a linear gradient, but what I want to do is go down to the gradient settings and change it from linear to angle. And so now we have a nice angle gradient, and I can go ahead, change the rotation, flip it, and you can see what that looks like. Now, what I want to do is pre-compose our gradient. So I'll right click, choose pre-compose, move all attributes, and call this gradient comp and hit OK. Then I'm just going to turn the eyeball switch off. And then I'll come up here, create a new adjustment layer. And then we'll come over here and we're going to be using a really cool effect called time displacement. And so we'll drop this onto our adjustment layer and we'll hit return and we'll call this time displace. And then we'll come up here to the displacement layer and we're going to select the gradient. Okay, so right away it's going to be a little bit slow and a little bit wild looking. But what I want to do is change the time resolution from 60 down to about 8. And that will actually make things render a little bit faster because instead of creating 60 copies, it's only creating 8 copies. So what is this effect doing? Well, basically it's using the gradient to time remap a section of the clip. So if we play this, we could basically see that each slice is creating a different point in time. Now, I want this to look a little bit more choppy. So what we can do is turn the max displacement time down. And that'll just create fewer slices. All right, let's go and take a look. All right, so that looks really cool. Now, this effect is completely live. So we could go in and make changes to the look of it, and it'll all update automatically. And that's what makes the time displacement effect so powerful. Now, the key to the time displacement map is the gradient comp. So if we open that up, we have a simple gradient. Now, the way to think about it is that the colors represent time. So white is the beginning and black is the end. So if we were to change this to say, instead of an angle, let's just do a radial. And now if we look at our final comp, so that's a really cool radial effect. Could be like a stylistic snowflake for like a holiday JCPenney commercial. A lot of options. Let's set it to linear and check that out. So it's very cool. We could even create an adjustment layer. And on top of this adjustment layer, we could do something like a turbulent displace. And what this does is add some like distortion noise. And let's take a look. All right, let's go and delete that and we'll come back to our main comp. Now, I want to add a few more details. So we'll come up here, we'll take the Polygon tool, and instead of selecting a layer, I'm going to create a shape layer by clicking in here, holding down Shift and Alt, and just dragging out. So I've created a shape layer. Now we'll go into the contents, Polystar, click on the fill, we'll delete that. I only want to use an outline stroke. Now I'm going to hide the mask. Then I'll come over here, solo the shape layer, open up the contents, and we'll go down to the Polystar stroke. Make some room here. And what I want to do is change it from a solid line to a dashed line. So we'll scroll down, see it says dashes here, and we'll click the plus sign. And so now we have some dashes, but instead of dashes, I want to create circles. So the way to do that is change the line cap mode to round, And then come down to dashes, hit the plus, and now we can have the gap control. Then turn the dash size down to 0 and turn up the gap. And then all we have to do is turn up the stroke width, and now we've created some dots. So if we want to create fewer dots, we can just turn up the gap amount. And what I want to do is basically animate the size of the stroke. So we'll turn it down to 0, set a keyframe, move forward, turn it up to 20, and then back down to 0. So it's basically on and then off. But because we're using our time displacement, we can get it to animate on. So let's put this down below our time displacement, turn off the solo control. All right, so we can see it animating in a circle, but what I want to do is hit U, and I'm going to move the keyframes over. So I want them to come on after the animation begins. So I think that looks pretty good. Now, what's nice about shape layers is that they're vectors. So we can scale them up really large and we won't lose quality. But in this case, I want to actually hit S, scale it down just a little bit. And that way we've added a little bit of detail. In fact, I'll duplicate it, edit, duplicate, and I'll scroll forward, hit U, and let's move the keyframes over later in time and then scale this down. So we're going to kind of create an effect where the dots are sort of the last thing that we see, or one of the last things that we see. Okay. All right, so that's looking pretty good. It's looking really good, actually. Sometimes when I make a tutorial, it doesn't quite look the way that my original example looks. And I usually say something like, well, just keep tweaking it until it looks good, obviously, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I just shift that responsibility onto you. All right, so one other thing I want to do is create another ring. So I'm going to duplicate the ring that we created originally. And I'm going to come down here to the width settings. And I'm going to turn these down to smaller values. And I'm also going to take the color, switch it over to white. And so that we're just creating a nice ring effect. Now, I'm also going to turn the frequency down. So we'll go over here, set that first keyframe. Instead of 6, let's do like 4. We'll turn the lifespan down even a bit. And I might even turn the fade out time up just a bit, like 0.2. All right, so I'm going to take the rings, we'll unsolo it. Now, instead of this being down here where the time displacement effect is changing it, let's put this copy above the time displacement effect. And that way these rings won't be affected by the time displacement. So, cool. Let's go ahead and turn the expansion down a bit. Maybe turn the size up to begin with. Nice. So just trying to add a little bit more detail to our design. All right, so now that we have our design element, let's go ahead and create our output comp. So we'll create a new composition. We'll do 720p, 1280 by 720, and we'll call this Polygon comp, and we'll hit OK. And then we'll come over here to the project, and then we'll take our Polygon design and drop it into the comp. So here we have it, looking good. All right, so let's go ahead and create a background. So I'll make a new solid, and we'll do like a dark grayish blue. We'll hit OK, background. And then what I want to do is take my polygon, hit S, and we'll scale it down just a little bit. And then we're going to create a fake shadow. So let's duplicate the polygon, Control D. All right, so because it's a shadow, I'm going to come over here, get the tint effect, and we'll drop that onto our solid, and we'll change both colors to black. Then we're going to come over here and add an effect called Scale Wipe. And it's a really cool effect that's going to help us create our shadow. So if we come over here, we could take the stretch amount, and you can see it kind of stretches the clip. So if we just do a little bit of a negative stretch, kind of creates a little bit of a shadow, and that just gives a little bit more dimension to our design. And then we'll add another effect called Linear Wipe. And this is basically going to be a transitional effect to fade out the edge. So we'll set that to 50 degrees also, and turn up the transition amount. And you can see it just kind of cuts it out. And we'll go to about here, and then turn up the feather. It's kind of like adding a mask. There we go. That just makes it look like more of a fall off of a shadow. You can tweak the settings there. All right, so that looks really nice. Now, the other effect that we did in the final example was this kind of like stretched out shadow. So what I can do for that is take my original copy. So here's our shadow. What I'll do is duplicate it, Control D, and then I'm going to pre-compose it. So I'll right click or hit Control Shift C to pre-compose. We'll move all the attributes and we'll call it Polygon Long Shadow. Then we'll hit OK. So then what I want to do is take that scale wipe effect, drop that onto the polygon, and what we can do, let's move it back a bit and turn the stretch value up. And you can see it just kind of stretches out if we keep going until we have perfectly straight parallel lines. Then what we'll do is we'll put it in the background here and maybe add that same tint effect. And maybe we'll actually give it like a dark blue tint. And then we'll set it to multiply. Then if we hit T, we can lower the opacity. Now the angle's not quite lining up, so let's change it, I think, to about 60 degrees, and then that will be parallel with the edge of the polygon. Just like that. But, you can play around. We could do a 90-degree, design and just kind of mix it up, or we could do, like a vertical one and actually make it look like a really long shadow. So, this is just an abstract kind of design element. So now another fun thing we can do is let's take our design and our design shadow and let's move those over. And that way just the long shadow starts before. And what we could do is even scale it up just a bit. So let's see. We'll scale it up maybe 110% or so that it's actually larger than our design. And that way it kind of frames the design a little bit and it's a little bit larger. All right, so that looks really nice. The other thing we could do is we open up the polygon design. We could take that ring layer and copy it, and let's put it into this larger comp. So we'll hit Control V, paste it, and maybe what we'll do is put it at the very end, center it up here. Maybe scale it down to about 50%. So just adding a little bit of extra detail to our final design. Now the other thing we have is a texture. So we'll come over here to the plaster texture. And what we could do is throw this down onto the background, set it to multiply, and that just gives it a little bit more life. The other thing I like to do is set it to screen, and then let's invert it. So we'll do channel, invert, and then we'll go over here, add a curves or like a levels adjustment. And we'll just crush it so that we just see some of these like white specks. And that just keeps it nice and clean, even though it's a bit of a grungy effect. Now, the other thing we could do is add an adjustment layer. And we'll put it down here and we'll type in vignette. And we'll choose Effect, Color Correction, Curves. And we'll just kind of darken it a bit. And then we'll create a ellipse mask. We'll double click on that so it creates the full size. And then we'll come down here to the mask, hit M, and set it to subtract, and then hit F, and we'll feather it out a lot. And so this way we just kind of focus our attention on the design a little bit. Maybe we could add a little bit of blue just to complement the color of the interior. And we could even take the background and go back to the solid settings and just add a touch blue back into that gray color. So it's all up to you guys. You can play around with this. And the key to this effect is customizing it, playing around with different color schemes and coming up with different arrangements. And that's basically what I did in a few of these examples. So you can kind of see I've just got a few copies that are arranged in different ways and offset. And we can take a look at this example here. All right, so you can see that actually transitions right into the OCP logo. That's perfect. Does anyone know what OCP is? RoboCop. It's the police department. when I was playing around with the early design, I was thinking, hey, that'd be a perfect animation for OCP and Nintendo 64. So anyway, definitely want to play around with this. There's simple things you could do with it, like this, have it kind of fade on. Now, in this example, I've actually just used circles. So instead of a polygon, I'm just using a circle and using all the same effects. So there really is some fun things you can do with various geometric shapes. And you could probably just use it as a really, really nice loading bar. Like I would watch this loading bar even if I didn't have to wait for something. The other nice thing is that you can actually time remap the effect. So here you can see it plays fast and it slows down, then it goes fast again. And the way you can do that is if you just take the comp of your animation, put it into a new comp, and then right click and choose enable time remap. And then what you can do is set a keyframe. So go forward to a point in time you want to freeze it, like right around here. Set a keyframe, go forward just a couple of frames, and then go to the end of the animation when it's all gone and set another keyframe. And then basically what you do is take these two keyframes and just shift them over. So that way it plays real time and then it slows down here and then goes back to real time. So let's just set up a couple of keyframes. So right click on this keyframe and choose keyframe easy ease out, and then right click on this, easy ease in. And that way when we look at it, it'll just have a Bezier curve. And then what we'll do is we'll just flip this up so that it goes into a straight line. And then same thing here is make sure that we have a straight line here. And that way it'll ease into the slow motion and then ease out. All right, so we'll go ahead and play this back. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I'll be sure to post a project file at videocopilot.net. Now, today we created a really cool 2D effect, but if you're looking to create some 3D graphics inside of After Effects, be sure to check out our plugin Element 3D version 2. A lot of cool stuff, shadows, 3D objects, and just a bunch of really cool things for doing motion graphics, titles. So definitely check that out as well. And if you're wondering about the sound effects, those are from our Motion Pulse collection. A bunch of really, really cool sound design tools just for motion graphics users. And of course, be sure to check us out on Twitter. We try to keep things up to date. And of course, our blog. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'm Andrew Kramer, and we will see you next time.